Money is something we as a species consider as valuable. Okay, sure, the dollar is getting less and less valuable as I speak, but that's not the point. We value it so much because it's what allows us to buy things. But there is one thing that money could never buy, and that's happiness. But holy can it rent it for a while, because this $2,648.94 purchase, whoo, did it bring me so much temporary happiness for a couple of weeks. Despite that, I have a couple of major gripes about this product. I can certainly say that there is no laptop on the market that is better than this one right here. So instead of just blabbing, let's just get into the review. Alright, so just to get things out of the way in terms of specs, let's just talk about this specific model that I have and specs and all that. So obviously you clicked on the title and you should know that this is a 16-inch variant, and there's one reason why it's a 16-inch variant. It's because any screen size smaller than this is no good. I'm serious. Screen real estate matters, especially when you're talking to this guy, so of course it's a 16-inch. In terms of the actual internal specs though, it's got the M1 Pro 10-core CPU. In fact, you can only get a 10-core CPU with a 16-inch, so duh. And then the 16-core GPU, because there's no chip binning in terms of the M1 Pro on the 16-inch models. 16 gigs of RAM, stuck with the base memory, just because, I mean, I already was able to get by okay with 4, and this thing has 8 and runs decently, so. And then pretty much the only upgrade I actually got was just the 1 terabyte SSD. I was able to get by with 512 gigs just fine, but I want the headroom in case I happen to work with larger projects in the future. So with that all the way, let's get into our first category, which I've actually answered already in another video that you can click the link right here to actually check out. These little buggers, why do they not come? Hello, I'm pointing here. Please put up a link here. Thank you. I don't want to talk too much about performance. That's because I've already made a video where I've actually benchmarked this whole thing, but I didn't actually get that descriptive in terms of real world and how it affects my workflow. So now I'll be able to actually get into that. So in terms of my workflow, exports are lightning fast. I love the lightning fast exports that it does. Beats videos literally take a minute to export, and podcasts actually take 20 minutes to export, which is pretty decent considering that they're usually over an hour long to like an hour and a half long, and it's 1080 60 footage that I've recorded, and well, I got to insert other effects like that too. So 20 minutes to export a video podcast. Nice. So that's pretty much the real world performance. I haven't done much in terms of audio production yet, and that's because right now my audio setup is such a mess that it's just really hard to actually record stuff, but I'm still working on it. It's just right now my current setup is not particularly ideal. Obviously, I came from x86 Macs. And, well, PCs too, I guess, because I used to be on Windows for most of my life. But this is not an x86 computer. This is an ARM computer. How have the x86 versus ARM differences affected my workflow? Because this is a work computer, essentially. Battery life is stupidly long. x86 could never give you this much battery. That's why we don't have x86 processor chips in our phones. They're all run on ARM. With that said, yeah, the battery life enhancements are absolutely insane, and considering that this is one of the most powerful laptops on the market, having this much performance and on battery too, like this is on battery as well, not even plugged in. I love this. And because of that, I was actually able to run a crazy test on that I posted on the vlog channel. I was able to record the entire process of me filming and editing a video. I even made enough time for a Photoshop export, despite how much I hate Photoshop right now. I was able to record that entire thing, edit that entire video that I was working on for this channel. Wow, this was absolutely crazy. And what did the battery drop? It only dropped by like 50%, and that's because, well, I'm recording my display using the webcam and also editing an iMovie at the same time and doing exports. The performance and the battery life on this thing are so good. I am not worried about the battery anymore, to the point where I actually do not take my charger with me. I'm dead serious. The battery is so good, I don't even take the charger with me. It always stays in its little outlet there. It's nuts. To sum this up, performance and battery life, this thing is amazing. I won't have to upgrade for years. But there's more to the performance than just the hardware. hardware does affect performance, but there's another thing that also affects performance as well. The software, and this is why I left Windows. It's because Windows clearly doesn't care about optimizing for anything. It's like,
the function? Well, yeah, just barely. Oh, you might have a few issues like...
I don't want to go too off topic here, but I do have to mention something very stupid I discovered about Windows. Windows has a built-in native feature to disable your CPU. Why? Anywho, back on topic. So how does macOS Monterey work on this? I have been using Monterey. I know people say you shouldn't be updating to the latest versions like right away and such, but in my experience, I don't usually have that many software bugs in terms of all of my Apple software. The only time I've experienced software bugs is on my iPod Touch that ran iOS 11, which, oh, I was barely able to actually get it updated to iOS 12, thank God. But that's not the point. The point is macOS Monterey. How does it work? Most apps work, and this is just, Monterey runs on both x86 and ARM, but this is the ARM version I'm talking about specifically. Most apps work. Now, I use mostly Apple's apps, like I use iMovie, GarageBand, Pages is my scripting tool. Pretty much the only third-party tools I use are like OBS for my screen recording and podcasting. I have to download separate apps for Photoshop because Apple doesn't have, their own Photoshop basically. So my point is I use very few non-Apple apps on this thing. So of course, it's all gonna run native, but what about the apps that I do use? For the most part, either there's a native version, like for example, Photoshop, or I don't know, just this Photoshop knockoff that I've actually really loved using so much. It is an Intel app, but obviously Rosetta runs it no problem and there's no performance issues at all. Rosetta mostly works. However, I have run into a few issues where Rosetta did not actually open. I was going to open a few Intel apps that I knew were Intel only, so I thought, okay, Rosetta should be able to handle this just fine, except I wasn't actually given an option to run Rosetta. Kind of odd. I've had a few of those issues. So for the most part, when it comes to app support and running Apple Silicon, you better make sure that your apps that you're going to run and know you're going to run actually work on this first. I have not had a single app crash on this. I've never had to open up the force quit menu and force quit an app. Everything has been running smoothly, except I've had a few iMovie specific bugs. It's not Monterey bugs, it's just iMovie bugs. I've been having this issue where it's just clipping the ends of my intros and outros. It's just the sound effects. The visuals and all that play back just fine. In fact, editing in iMovie is much more enjoyable now too. But unfortunately, I'm experiencing this issue where music clips are getting clipped and all of that. If you actually want to see that in action, you could go ahead and check out my actual editing video where I basically made that entire YouTube video with this. But the biggest thing that I was able to experience that I loved experiencing and really do not want to go back, that unfortunately my old MacBook Pro and this iMac here can't really deliver, despite that this iMac has a wireless card that supports all this stuff. The continuity and sync between my iPhone and my MacBook, I love it so much. I get universal copy and paste, something that really impressive. AirDrop is also lightning fast between my iPhone and my MacBook here. It's even faster than my iMac, despite that I've updated the wireless on this thing to support the actual AirDrop we use today. Being able to start a text message on my phone, but if I decide this is going to be a longer text and I'd like to have a physical keyboard, oh, I have my Mac in front of me, and look, I can just click on this icon here and my message just pops up like that. That is so useful, so helpful. Why does Windows not have features like these? Oh wait, it's because they're Microsoft. They don't care. The software is nice, but there's one thing that I really enjoy about it, and that's actually just viewing it on this really nice display. Obviously, because this is the 16-inch MacBook Pro, we know what screen size it is. It's a 16.2-inch display, and this display is at a resolution of 3.5K. In terms of brightness, it goes up to 500 nits with a peak brightness of 1600 nits for that awesome HDR. Powered by mini LED, which is really nice. Oh, and blooming, I don't notice any blooming. I mean, there is technically blooming, but I just don't notice it. I can't see it. Yeah, no blooming issues, even in the dark. And to even top it off, it has this 120 Hz ProMotion panel. I've seen ProMotion before and I love it so much. I mean, it's not a deal breaker decision in terms of a purchase, but after seeing 120 Hz, that is something I really appreciate. I love seeing 120 Hz on this thing, especially in editing on those timelines. I love seeing that smooth motion with the timeline. Mwah, chef's kiss. So yeah, this is actually, believe it or not, the best display in a laptop. Don't even at me. There's no display better. Even though, yeah, it's a 3.5K and some laptops have 4K displays. Honestly, you don't really need a 4K display in a laptop. And I've looked so hard. I'm trying so hard to tell the difference between 1080p and, well, 3.5K. I don't notice the difference. I literally don't, especially at the screen size. Now, 4K displays are more useful on larger displays like a 27-inch or something like that, for example. But on a 16-inch display, that's a little overkill. The resolution on this is definitely overkill, but very well appreciated. And I'm actually going to explain why I actually went with the 16-inch display and why. And something I want to get on real quick is why the 16-inch is definitely superior to the 14-inch. And this drives me nuts about everyone who wants to go the 14-inch.
Everyone likes the smaller laptops because it's more portable, it's lighter, and it fits in more areas.
What areas does this laptop not fit in? I am trying so hard to figure this out. I put this in so many different tight spaces. It actually is able to fit perfectly within that one cavity on my old desk. What space does this not fit in?
It's heavy and
It's not that heavy. I mean, try to compare this to my previous laptop, which is a 13-inch laptop. This is lighter than that. I don't understand why people want to compromise with 14 inches. The only way I can see why that would be reasonable is price. Okay, yeah, smaller displays mean, well, they're going to be cheaper because there's not as many pixels to make that display. But for all these other reasons like portability and weight and being able to fit it in certain spaces, I don't understand these people. I really don't. I'm trying so hard, but I don't understand why compromising in that aspect just for the sake of portability. I don't understand it, because when you compromise on real estate, there's less room to work with, which means you're struggling to breathe with all of the different windows and applications you have open. Now sure, maybe you don't have that many open, like you have a Pages document open at a time, or just one web browsing window open or something. Maybe you don't have that many applications open at the same time, but when you do, you really learn to appreciate that bigger display, and that is why I've hated the small laptops ever since, well, I tried using them. I've used a small laptop for years now. I've finally been able to switch to this thing, and I have not regretted going bigger. 16 versus 14. I don't understand why you'd want to go 14 unless you really want to get the cheapest of the cheap. That's the only logical reason I can think of why you want to get the 14-inch. Other than that, no. Go 16-inch. Go big display. Stop compromising with all of these other, just because of all these other little excuses. Portability? How is this thing not portable? I don't get it. And the last thing I need to talk about with this display is how top-notch it is. The notch does not get in the way, because yeah, there's a notch. The wallpaper I have set here doesn't really do a good job showing it. I'll actually make a B-roll clip of showing off the notch, but even when I actually did try to get the notch visible, honestly, it doesn't bother me, and the primary reason for this is because I'm never even looking at it. I love notches in general. I know I'm weird, but even despite how much I actually love having a notch, I don't even remember that my laptop has it most of the time. Not just because of the way I have it displayed here with this wallpaper all the time, but just because I never look there. I'm always looking towards the middle of the display because, well, that's where my content is. That's where all of my windows and workspaces are. And even when I do go to the menu bar, it's either to the left of it or the right. When do you ever go to the middle of the menu bar except for when you have applications that actually spread menus there? For those of you who do not want to get this because of the notch, honestly, don't be stupid like that. The notch does not get in the way. It never does. Most of the time, it's actually hard to see. Like this specific wallpaper I have, it already makes it a little more difficult to see. I can still see it though. I still can see it, but I just forget it's there. And when you go into full screen, well, it's basically gone because due to the black levels of this mini LED display, you can't see the notch. No complaints there. And speaking of that notch, let's actually talk about the camera real quick. And thank God we got a camera upgrade in this thing. Finally, because for the longest time we've been stuck with 720p webcams. Even though despite my previous laptop had a 720p webcam, I swear that thing was not 720p at all. That had to be 480p at best. This webcam is so good that I've switched to using that webcam as my podcasting camera, and whenever I do my video clips when I'm actually looking at web pages and such, yeah, I use that webcam for the same process as well. The webcam webcam is awesome. Best webcam I've ever seen in a laptop. There's none better. And to go along with the webcam, we also have to talk about the mics as well. And you know what? I'm gonna actually approve and give them studio quality rating. I use them for podcasting. My only complaint with it is it's a little quiet, but that's just because of where I actually position myself. I actually have to get closer, and speaking at this volume too, even when I speak at this exact volume for podcasting, it still comes out quiet, so I have to turn the volume up to max unless I get like this close or something to it. So in terms of picking up my voice, a little difficult, but when it does pick up my voice, I gotta give it that studio quality ranking. It's that good. Also, in terms of sound, let's talk about the speakers. They are stupid good. They are stupid good. I do not know how other laptops can't even match this quality. But then again, this quality is awesome. The speakers are so good that I'm actually not that concerned about needing my AirPods all the time anymore. The only time I basically put my AirPods in are, well, when anyone asks me to keep the music or the audio to myself and they don't want to listen to what I'm watching or listening to. Or when I plug my wired headphones into the headphone jack, because I've mentioned this before, you do not edit audio with a wireless connection. You have to go wired. But when I do listen to the speakers on this thing, it is a major upgrade and a very enjoyable one too. Really appreciate it. Also, next to the speakers, I actually, not the keyboard just yet, we'll get in the keyboard later. I want to talk about the trackpad. I hate trackpads. I'm the person who does not like trackpads. I always prefer a mouse, and that's why I have one of these guys here. Despite that, there's actually a trackpad on top of this mouse. But despite how much I really hate trackpads and using them in general, this trackpad has mostly changed my mind. And I've heard so many stories on how Apple makes the best trackpads, especially today. Ever since they came out with the Force Touch trackpad, there has been none better. And you know what? I personally have to agree. There is no trackpad better than this. First of all, it's huge. A huge trackpad. That's a big plus. And no matter where I click it, I can click it anywhere and I get basically the same exact feedback no matter where I click, versus that old diving board design on my last laptop. Ugh, I hated that. And having that extra real estate with the trackpad as well makes gestures a lot more seamless. And yet, gestures on macOS are much better compared to Windows. I've used the Windows trackpad gestures before, and honestly, they're a joke. This thing, on the other hand, has mostly replaced my mouse. There are still areas where I do prefer using a mouse still, and for the most part, it's just in video editing. I still like being able to move my playhead as well as scrub along the timeline at the same time. A trackpad does not allow you to do this, and that's because you're either scrolling the timeline or you're just moving the cursor. Meanwhile, I can scroll along the timeline and move my cursor at the same time with my mouse. It's mostly replaced my mouse functions, like if I do web browsing or scripting, or I guess some Photoshop work as well. Not all of it, but some. It's been able to replace the mouse in most areas, but whenever it comes to scrubbing along timelines and such, no, I still need to have my mouse with me. But the fact that it's actually able to replace my mouse in that many scenarios, that's impressive. Way to go, Apple. The last positive that I have to mention right now is actually Touch ID. Now, as someone with eczema, I am very concerned about fingerprint scanners, and that's because eczema, and if you need a quick description of what eczema is, it's basically a skin condition where your body doesn't make enough skin, and because of that, I'm missing a fingerprint in a few areas. Like, for example, this thumb here, the most common thumb that you'll use for like the in-display fingerprint scanner, doesn't have a fingerprint, which makes fingerprint scanners mostly useless. useless, except, well, you don't use your thumb with a fingerprint scanner in this thing. You use your index finger, which, luckily enough, I actually have a fingerprint. And despite my concerns about yet having eczema and this thing not being able to recognize it for long, I have yet to experience a failed attempt with this fingerprint scanner. Thank God Touch ID actually works on this thing. I've never gotten it to work on an iPhone before, but I've actually been able to get it to work on this, and it works every single time. Though I am sure that will change at some point when my fingerprints go bad. Makes me really wish this thing had Face ID. Honestly, Touch ID, due to the fact that it works this consistently and hasn't failed me yet, I don't miss Face ID too much. But I'm still concerned just because I have the skin condition. Alright, so those are pretty much most of the positives. Yeah, there's a lot of positives with this thing, but unfortunately, I have to get into 2 negatives with this thing, and you're gonna think I'm weird and crazy for this. Out of all things to complain about, this is something that a lot of pro users supposedly wanted back. Here's why you probably don't. First thing, we're gonna talk about the keyboard. The actual keyboard itself is fine, and I actually like how they added this touch of anodizing the keyboard bay to be the same color as the keys. It looks really nice, really sleek, really clean. Nice touch, Apple. And the keys themselves, I love typing on this keyboard. In fact, I'd rather type on this keyboard more than I would rather type on this keyboard, even though they're both chiclet keyboards. I prefer chiclet style over mechanical keyboards. I do not understand why people like them. I love the keyboard on that. It is phenomenal, except there's one problem with this keyboard that really drives me nuts. It's not the travel, it's not feel or inconsistency, it's not potential reliability because this is their magic keyboard, it's not the butterfly. What could possibly be the problem with this keyboard? There's no touch bar. You might be thinking,
What? How is that a problem? We've hated the touch bar for so long and have been begging Apple to get rid of it because it's bad, right?
okay, let me give you this analogy here. Getting rid of the touch bar and giving us function keys like this is basically the same thing as getting rid of the software keyboard on our iPhones and bringing back the physical keyboards on our smartphones. We ditched the physical keyboards on our smartphones for a reason. It's because those keys are single, maybe dual purpose if you hit like the shift key and oh yeah, then you can capitalize the letter and such. You have so many keys that are only being used for 1, maybe 2 purposes. Meanwhile, the display and the actual stuff that is able to change and you're going to interact with most of the time, well, it's small. And because there's less dynamic control on that display due to the lack of screen real estate, that means there's less functionality altogether. Versus, wow, we got rid of that physical keyboard on our smartphone and look, we have all of this extra screen real estate for more dynamic control of navigating through the system or performing certain functions. And when we need that keyboard to come back up, poof, we can put it back in software. Perfect, right? So why can't we do the same with the touch bar?
Well, evidently it's because it freezes all the time.
You want to know something? When the whole entire system freezes, what good are function keys gonna do you? I'm serious. I don't understand the logic of this argument.
The touch bar freezes and I have to restart the computer.
Yeah, well, when the entire system freezes, the entire keyboard is unresponsive. How is this supposed to help? Touch bar. I want it back, and this is the biggest downside in my opinion. It needs the touch bar. I don't know why they got rid of it, and a lot of people have finally actually realized too. They're starting to realize.
You know what? Maybe the touch bar was actually more useful than we thought.
Oh yeah, and by the way, the functions on these function keys, they're even more useless. Do not disturb. That's a scheduled function, so I'm never pushing that key. Dictation. What do you think the keyboard's for? Spotlight. I'm used to command space all the time. I do not like how they got rid of the launchpad key though. That was nice, and now they got rid of that. Once again, I still got my same exact problem where I'm using only 5 out of the 12 keys, brightness and volume controls. That's literally it. I have no use for the rest. Versus if I had a touch bar, yeah, I could get a lot more functionality. Like, I'd be able to toggle through my tabs on my web browser faster. I'd actually be able to get rid of my mouse if I was able to scrub through my timeline with the touch bar and move my cursor at the same time with the trackpad. But no, I lost that functionality, so I still need to bring my mouse with me. Touch bar, it needs to come back. And the last complaint I have with this laptop is, once again, a very controversial thing, but you gotta hear me out and hear my reasoning for this. Believe it or not, my last complaint is the port selection.
What?
In terms of the I/O on this thing, we've got 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, an HDMI and an SD card slot, and MagSafe and a headphone jack that supports high impedance headphones. What is my problem with the port selection on this thing? Basically, they got rid of the superior port. Honestly, I did have an issue with the port selection on the last MacBook Pro, the one that was like 4 Thunderbolt 3s. And my biggest problem with that is I wanted more. 4 is not enough. I wanted more than just 4 Thunderbolt 3s. I wanted like 6 or something like that. So they gave us more ports. Well, unfortunately, they're not Thunderbolt ports that they gave us. In fact, they actually got rid of one of them. So this drives me mad. The MagSafe port, okay, sure, it enables the fast charging, although honestly, I don't really need to fast charge it because the battery is good enough to the point where I'm actually just able to charge it overnight like I do the rest of my devices. So I don't need the fast charging, but okay, it's there. The other 2 ports are the SD card slot and the HDMI. So, okay, there are a bunch of camera people that have wanted this SD card slot back so much. My thing is, I don't use SD cards enough. I still use them, and the primary reason why I use them is for this guy here. I record to the micro SD card on that, and I use an SD card adapter, but the frequency in which I actually use the camera on this thing and record to that is so infrequent that honestly, I'd just be okay with using a dongle and having another Thunderbolt port for potentially something else to be used. So for camera people, okay, this is just a personal thing. I just don't use it frequently enough to justify it replacing a Type-C port. And then the HDMI port. I do not understand why they brought it back. I really wish it was, once again, Thunderbolt 3, because honestly, I mean, it's even an HDMI 2.0 port. Not only does it not even support 4K at 120, which Thunderbolt does, at the same time, you're also still not getting the same USB-C hub support that you can get with most displays. So yeah, why are they sticking this inferior of a port in there? So those are my biggest complaints, and they're small, and because there are so few of them compared to the pros of this thing, they're mostly non-issues, but I still want that touch bar back most of all. That's my biggest complaint about this thing. With all of this said, is it really worth the amount of money that I spent on this thing? Do you seriously have to ask? In terms of hardware, Windows can't offer anything remotely similar to this package. Sure, you can get 12th gen chips now and an RTX 3080 that has similar performance to this thing. But here's the thing. What happens if you unplug those 12th gen Intel chips and those NVIDIA RTX 3080s? You drop performance really fast versus this thing. I can unplug this and the performance stays the same on battery or connected to power. It doesn't matter. Versus those other Windows laptops, you can't get anything remotely similar in terms of the performance of this thing. You also can't get a display as good as this. Speakers, microphones, webcam, trackpad, keyboard, nothing comes close to this. So is this a good value? Yes. So hardware wise, this is a really good value. Software, once again, I have to give out this warning. You better check and make sure that all of your apps actually run on this thing before you actually go out and buy it. But I can guarantee you this, if you use mostly Apple's apps, like for example, I use Pages, Safari, iMovie is my video editor. I am actually planning on switching to Final Cut at some point. Then yeah, obviously it's going to work. But if you use any obscure third-party apps, check and make sure that it'll actually run on this thing. Doesn't have to be a native version because most of the time Rosetta can give you pretty similar performance. It's not perfect performance compared to most emulators on other computers. Rosetta is the best. So overall, despite that this is my most expensive purchase ever in the history of everness, this is the best purchase I have ever made. Alright, so that is my review of the 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro. I love this laptop, and if there's anybody else who hasn't gotten it yet and is considering it, honestly, this is a really good package, and it's really worth that money. I guarantee you, this laptop is going to last you a very long time. Alright, thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the stuff below. My name is DeWolf, Random Alpha, signing out.